It's Wednesday, April 30th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, 100 Days Down. President Donald Trump marks his first 100 days with a pair of magazine interviews and a sit-down interview on ABC, which is what we're going to be focusing on today because it nearly went off the rails a couple of times. And he said some of the most important things, I think, he's said to a camera since becoming president. But before we dive in here, there are a few quick things to set the scene. The first is why we care about the first 100 days at all. That comes from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR, who, during his first 100 days, as the country was in the grip of the Great Depression, he moved at a pace that we had not seen, I guess, frankly, really, and haven't seen since until this Trump administration, when it comes to how we understand how the U.S. government can be remade. FDR did a lot of things through direct presidential power, like Trump has done, but also passed a lot more laws in those first 100 days. He also had the advantage of having a really late inauguration compared to when it is now. He was elected in November of 1932, and back then, Inauguration Day wasn't until March of the following year, so he wasn't president until the third month of 1933, and that meant he had months to plan, to get up to speed, and also to dodge outgoing President Herbert Hoover's attempts to pin some of his disasters on FDR. Later, FDR would amend the Constitution to move Inauguration Day back to January, where we know it is now, which worked, and that became the 20th Amendment, which on the one hand helped speed up the transition between presidents, and on the other hand pretty much made sure that no future president would have the advantage that FDR had when it came to making a huge splash during the first 100 days. But since then, we've carefully watched the first 100 days of each president as a measure of ambition and their ability to lead during what is typically a honeymoon period for most presidents, because voters generally are optimistic about their incoming president, whether or not they voted for him. And that gets to the second piece of context here. Trump is at historically low approval ratings for a president at his 100-day mark in every single credible poll done between March and now. He is underwater. The most recent was a Siena College New York Times poll that has him at just 39% approval. That is below his own low record-setting approval rating from his first 100 days in 2017, where he was at 42%. On top of that, that same New York Times Siena College poll came out and said that a majority of Americans think the United States is on the wrong track at 53%, with 54% saying he had gone too far in the changes he's been making to the political and economic landscapes. Now, I want to be clear here, that last question there is a bit of a double-barrel question, which is kind of a no-no in polling. It means you're being asked, as the person answering the question, two things there. And it could potentially, in this case, mean that someone thinks he's gone too far in either politics or the economy, but maybe not gone far enough in one or the other. So it can kind of muddy the answers when it comes to that thing. But regardless here, having a majority of Americans saying he's gone too far in some capacity in this early point in a presidency is not what you want, especially when those first 100 days are all about good vibes and ambition. And because of those numbers, Trump has been desperately trying to spin his way out of those things. And that gets us to the interview. So it kicked off with Trump giving a tour of the Oval Office to ABC's Terry Moran, who would be doing the interview. But it was less a tour and more just Moran pointing at things around the Oval Office and asking Trump about them, while Trump sat behind the Resolute desk, the name for the president's desk, and answering. And it was weird for two visual reasons. So first, Terry Moran is tall, maybe taller than Trump, who is about 6'3". So it was really odd to have Moran standing there, not sitting in a chair next to the president, and to have Trump turning and talking to someone, let's say, at belt buckle height, to be delicate about it. And it's not like Trump hasn't given Oval Office tours where he walks around. he's done it before, most recently with the Fox News' Laura Ingraham just a few weeks ago. So this is something that Trump chose to do, and it is something he's done in the past, specifically with men, and specifically when he wants to seemingly project some kind of power from behind the Resolute desk, because remember, everything for Trump is about the show, the visuals. Does it look good on TV? And I'm not really sure this did that, but it was just a really odd way to start this thing, because the interview in earnest wasn't shot like that. It was done the normal way, with Trump and Moran sitting opposite each other in the Oval Office. But that gets you some of the context here and does bring us to the meat of this interview, and it was a lot. So first, Trump is asked what he thinks his biggest accomplishment has been during these first 100 days, and he says the border. And the interview does obviously come around to immigration a little later, and we will too, because it actually gets to one of the most important moments, I think, in the entire interview. But here's what Trump answered right away.
So what's the one thing, just one thing, that you think is the most significant thing you've done so far in these 100 days?
Well, I think maybe the border is the most significant, because our country was really going bad. They were allowing people to come in from prisons, as you know, and you've heard me say it, but you've heard a lot of people say it. Prisons, mental institutions, gang members, murderers. We had many murderers, 11,888, they think. Some murdered more than one person. So you had murderers coming in, you had everybody coming in, and not just South America, from all over the world. They were emptying their prisons into our country. And now it's totally closed down. And you've seen just yesterday, they announced 99.9%. Nobody thought that could happen. And it happened quickly, very quickly. And I think that's very significant, but we're doing other things.
So what he is saying there is, at best, unverifiable and mostly proven lies. So Trump made this claim on the campaign trail a lot, that South American and Central American countries were emptying their prisons and asylums into the U.S. And now I'm still not convinced that he knows the difference between asylums, which is a really outdated term for mental health hospitals, and people seeking asylum. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if he confused the two at some point during the campaign or whenever, and the staff around him just rolled with it because it plays well. But on top of that, it's also not remotely true. The Marshall Project, which is a criminal justice nonprofit journalism outlet, did a deep dive into this claim and could not find any evidence that it was true, even working with journalists in Central and South America to try and prove Trump's claims correct, and they just couldn't do it. And then there's the claim that there were nearly 12,000 murderers in the country. Trump is referring to a report from DHS from last September that found there were 13,000 immigrants in the U.S. who had homicide convictions. But the DHS spokesperson at the time pointed out two critical things. One, the data went back decades. We're talking nearly 40 years, according to the Department of Homeland Security, and it included tens of thousands of people who had come across the border with criminal records during Trump's first administration as well. Second, it also included a large number of people who were under the jurisdiction or were already incarcerated by local, state, and federal law enforcement partners, meaning a lot of the people that are on this list aren't out on the streets, but Trump is painting this like there are these large numbers of roaming murderers all over the place, and that simply isn't the case. And then he said the thing the White House has been touting for days, that there's been a 99.9% drop in border crossings since he took office. The only place that number seems to be coming from is Trump himself. He posted that number on Truth Social, his social media site, and then the White House press secretary ran with that number. Other Republicans ran with that number. It got planted in the New York Post, which is owned by the same people who own Fox News and was owned for a long time by his son-in-law, Jared Kushner. And now Trump is just throwing that number around like it's verified. And there is no question that border crossings are way down. When you do some of the back-of-the-envelope math on border crossings at the southern border, which is what Trump and his administration are generally talking about, border crossings there are down about 96%. which sort of begs the question, why does Trump feel the need to bump that number up to 99.9%? I don't know. 96% is still a huge number in its own right and something the White House should be running with. Why add the extra 3.9%? I don't know. But let's move on, because then things head into the economy, and like I said, they will circle back to immigration. And I am editing some of this economic answer here just to skip to the important parts. Otherwise, we'd be here all day.
If you look at what's happening now, we're only there for 100 days, as you say. And in 100 days, we took over. We had bad inflation for 4 years, for 2 years of, especially 2 years of his administration. I would say record-setting like we've never seen. They say 48 years, the worst in 48 years. I say it was much worse than that.
Yeah.
Right. So now if you look at what's happened, energy is down. Gasoline hit $1.98 in a few states during the last couple of days. It was $3.50 and $4 and $4.50. But gasoline is way down. When I took over, you remember the big thing with eggs. They hit me the first week. Eggs, like it was my fault. I said, I didn't cause this problem. This problem was caused by Biden. What's the problem with eggs? And they said, they've doubled. And well, eggs are down 87% since I got involved. A lot of that is...
Okay, so Trump is right that inflation was at a record high we hadn't seen for decades under Biden. Economists still maintain that the vast majority of inflation wasn't caused by Biden or even by the previous Trump administration, but by the massive amount of stress COVID put on the economy here at home and around the world. Trump is wrong, however, in saying that it was the highest inflation we'd ever seen. The actual highest level of inflation was at 30%, right around there, 29.7%, back in 1778, just 2 years after we declared independence. But moving on here, because that's not really the important part, it's what Trump is saying about prices that most people are going to care about. He's right that energy prices are down. We can see that from the government's own consumer price index. But that isn't translating into gas prices. He's been saying this thing for a few days, that gas has been down to $1.98 in some states, and it simply is not true. There isn't a state in the country that is below $2.67, according to AAA. And then there's this bit about eggs, and apparently all of the what about the egg prices things has actually gotten under his skin, despite you hearing from a lot of Democratic consultants and opponents to Trump who don't want this to be the rallying cry for people who don't like Trump. They think it's trite and they think it's talking down to voters, but apparently it is working because Trump is upset by this. And I have no idea what metric Trump is looking at when he says grocery prices or egg prices are down. Egg prices remain at historically high levels. According to the Federal Reserve, the average price for a dozen large eggs, which is the most commonly bought and sold egg size in the United States, is $6.23. Grocery prices overall rose 3% last month, year over year. Those are our most recent numbers from the government's own Consumer Price Index that's put together by the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And then there was this answer, which I thought was among his most important.
There is a lot of concern out there. People are worried, even some people who voted for you saying, I didn't sign up for this. So how do you answer those concerns?
Well, they did sign up for it, actually.
Okay, so this is the answer that you probably saw or heard yesterday online. It was part of the teaser trailer for this interview. But it plays into a theme that happens throughout this interview, and I want you to listen for it as we go through. It's Trump not taking responsibility for his actions as president. Him saying this is what they voted for is shifting the blame of the economic freefall that's been caused by the trade war from his tariffs off of himself and off of those decisions onto his voters. It's something he does constantly throughout this interview. No matter the issue, the blame, when it's bad, is never on him. And it's not a new thing. And in fact, he just did it today in a cabinet meeting after we learned that the economy shrank last quarter while he was president. He said it was Biden's fault and then suggested that some projected shrinking of the economy next quarter would also still be Biden's fault, even though Trump would have been president for 6 months at that point. But like I said, Trump has a pattern of shifting the blame onto someone else when things go bad and taking credit for it when things are good. But let's move on to the immigration portion, even though you should keep those things in mind here, because this immigration portion of the interview is really crucial for two reasons. First, Trump refuses to say that he believes in fundamental civil rights, and again shirks his responsibility as president. So Terry Moran asked Trump point blank if he believes in due process. Take a listen.
Well, the law requires that every single person who is going to be deported gets a hearing first.
Well,
do you acknowledge that?
I'll have to ask the lawyers about that. All I can say is this.
Just sort of let that wash in for a second, because really, the only acceptable answer to that question for a sitting U.S. president is yes. Yes, because due process is part of the Fifth Amendment, which says no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. And that was then backed up in the 14th Amendment, which says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without the due process of law. But instead, Trump says he has to ask his lawyers about it, and it's alarming. But he continues.
If you're going to have 21 million people, and if we have to get a lot of them out because they're criminals, we're going to have to act fast. We can't. Do you think we can give 21 million trials? Let's say each trial takes 2 weeks. Is that what you want us to do?
The law
give
is the law, sir. The law is the law, and you're
the law
sworn
doesn't
to
say anything
uphold it.
about trials.
No, not trials, hearings. I said
These
hearings.
people came in, they're not citizens. They came in illegally. They came into our country illegally.
And
we have to get them out.
There's a legal process for that.
I can't, sure, and we follow the legal process. I can't have a trial, a major trial for every person that came in illegally. We have thousands of murderers that came in. They're going to murder people. They already have murdered people in our country.
Right, so
we have to get them out,
they're
and we have to
bad
get
guys,
them out fast.
Really bad guys, but in our country, even bad guys get due process, right?
If people come into our country illegally, there's a different standard. These are illegal. They came in illegally.
But they get due process.
Well, they get a process where we have to get them out, yeah.
Okay, so that's a lot, and also wildly unconstitutional. People do not get different due process rights because of how they entered the U.S. It's a core foundation of our legal system of justice and how it works. But then there's this little thing that keeps happening here, and you've just actually heard it twice, and it will keep happening throughout this interview. It's this reflex that Trump has, obviously from his days in New York when he was constantly in and out of courtrooms and lawsuits. He reflexively says, we follow the law, or I'll have to ask my lawyers, before then immediately saying something that would be violating the law. It's again this little interesting shield he throws up when he wants to shift the blame. So on the facts here, and for what it's worth, there are not 21 million undocumented immigrants in the United States. The highest end estimates are about 14 million, and even those are pretty out there from what we understand. Usually the estimates fall right around 11 million people. This is a lie that he has said for years, and it remains a lie when he said it this time. And that brings us to the really explosive part of this interview that I think is also the most important part of the entire thing. Here it is.
Kilmar Abrego-Garcia. He's the Salvadoran man who crossed into this country illegally, but who is under a protective order that he not be sent back to El Salvador. Your government sent him back to El Salvador and acknowledged in court that was a mistake. And now the Supreme Court has upheld an order that you must return him facilitate his return to the United States. What are you doing to comply?
Well, the lawyer that said it was a mistake was here a long time, was not appointed by us. Should not have said that. And just so you understand, the person that you're talking about, you're making this person sound, this is a MS-13 gang member, a tough cookie, been in lots of skirmishes, beat the hell out of his wife, and the wife was petrified to even talk about him, okay? This is not an innocent, wonderful gentleman from Maryland.
I'm not saying he's a good guy. It's about the rule of law. The order from the Supreme Court stands,
sir. You came into our country illegally.
You could get him back. There's a phone on this desk.
I could.
You could pick it up, and with all the power of the presidency, you could call up the president of El Salvador and say, send him back right now.
And if he were the gentleman that you say he is, I would do that.
But the court has ordered you to facilitate that.
I'm not the one making this decision. We have lawyers that don't want to do this.
But the buck stops in this office.
No. I follow the law. You want me to follow the law? If I were the president that just wanted to do anything, I'd probably keep him right where he is.
Supreme Court says what.
So first, Trump admits here that he has the power to get Abrego-Garcia back, but won't. And then says, I'm not the one making this decision, which he sort of blows by, and Moran does push back, but Trump pushes right through. But that is a sitting U.S. president in the Oval Office, no less, saying he is not in control of his own immigration or foreign policy. Yes, presidents listen to their lawyers and are often stopped by legal advice from White House counsel. But that's not what Trump is saying here. He's not saying he was not advised to do this by lawyers. He's saying he's being overruled by the White House legal team as the end-all, be-all authority in the White House, even though he just said he could change Abrego-Garcia's circumstances, and then says if it had not been for these lawyers. It's a really stunning moment of Trump shirking the responsibilities of the office of the president, which I know a lot of people are going to think when I say something like that, oh, how quaint or how old-fashioned. But it's just not. Yes, the job is bigger than any one single person, and presidents often lean on advisors, but their own awesome decision-making power in this office is what makes the president the president. It's what makes it the most powerful job on the planet. And here, our president is saying, not my circus, not my monkeys. I was just the guy in the room while the lawyers talked it out. And I just thought it was such a telling moment about how Trump is approaching this second term. And that gets us to something you've probably already seen today because it was really the explosive part of the interview, this fight over tattoos on Kilmar Abrego-Garcia's hands.
You'll pick out one man, but even the man that you picked out, he said he wasn't a member of a gang. And then they looked, and on his knuckles, he had MS-13.
There's a dispute
over
that.
Wait a minute. He had MS-13 on his knuckles tattooed.
He had some tattoos that are interpreted that way. But let's move on.
Wait a minute. Hey, Terry.
He did not have the letter MS-13.
It says MS-13.
That was Photoshop. That
was Photoshop. Terry, you can't do that. Hey, they're giving you the big break of a lifetime. You know, you're doing the interview. I picked you because, frankly, I never heard of you, but that's okay. I picked you, Terry, but you're not being very nice. He had MS-13 tattooed.
Right, we'll agree to disagree. I want to move on to something else.
Terry, do you want me to show you the picture?
I saw the picture.
And you think it was Photoshop? Well,
here we go.
Don't Photoshop it. Go look at his hand. He had MS-13.
He did have tattoos that can be interpreted that way. I'm not an expert on them. I want to turn to Ukraine, sir.
Terry,
I want to get to Ukraine.
No. He had MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. This is why people no longer believe the news, because
when
it's
he was
fake
photographed
news.
in El Salvador, they aren't there. But let's just go on. They aren't there when he's in El Salvador.
They weren't there, but they're there now, right?
No,
but they're there
in
now.
your picture.
Terry.
Ukraine, sir.
He's got MS-13 on his knuckles.
All right.
Okay?
Well, we'll take a look at that.
You do such a disservice.
We'll take a look at that,
Why don't
sir.
you just say, yes, he does, and, go on to something else?
It's contested.
So before we get into the actual knuckles of this, Trump is getting frustrated at this point because this interview has been far less deferential than he's used to. You can hear him saying, why don't you just ask the questions I want you to ask? It was a real deal interview. Moran is a no bullshit guy. But the thing about the knuckle tattoos here is that Trump is talking about this picture where you can see Abrego-Garcia has on his fingers a marijuana leaf, a smiley face, a cross, and a skull. Now, that picture was then edited by somebody who gave Trump this picture to hold up for a photo op in the Oval Office, where above each tattoo on the fingers were clearly typed out letters and numbers that spelled MS-13. One character over each tattoo meant to explain that his finger tattoos indicated he was a member of the MS-13 gang. We know they were digitally added because those characters are not in the photos that were taken of Kilmar Abrego-Garcia during his meeting with Maryland Senator Chris Van Hollen just 2 weeks ago, and because it's really, really clear they aren't tattoos, but digital typeface on top of this picture. And it's also really, really troubling that the President of the United States doesn't seem to know that. Now, experts on MS-13 widely agree that the tattoos in and of themselves aren't a good indicator that Abrego-Garcia is a member of MS-13. The tattoos were also never brought up in court documents, and he, his family, and his lawyers maintain he is not and has never been a member of MS-13. Now, that hasn't stopped people online, and apparently in the administration, from playing a tinfoil hat edition of Connect the Dots, saying that the marijuana leaf stands for the letter M, the smiley face stands for the letter S, the cross is the number 1, not the letter T, and the skull is the number 3, not the letter S, because it has 3 holes. Again, experts don't think that's all the case necessarily, but that's the rationale coming from people who support this thing. And more importantly here, like I've said before, what Moran is trying to get Trump to understand and what Trump doesn't want to understand here is that none of that matters in this case because the Abrego-Garcia case is about due process under the Constitution. But let's skip ahead a little bit here. I'm skipping over the foreign policy section, actually, not because Trump didn't say anything about the war in Ukraine or Gaza. It's just stuff that we have heard before and he will continue to say. It happens at around the 20-minute mark, so the halfway point in this interview. I'll put a link to the entire interview in the show notes if you want to go and watch that. But the last 2 things I'm going to focus on here are Trump's answers about Pete Hegseth and DOGE. So here's what he said when he was asked about Hegseth's future as Secretary of Defense.
I had a talk with him, and whatever I said, I probably wouldn't be inclined to tell you. But we had a good talk. He's a talented guy. He's young. He's smart, highly educated. And I think he's going to be a very good hopefully a great defense secretary, but he'll be a very good defense secretary.
You have 100% confidence in
I don't have 100% confidence in anything. Okay? Anything. Do I have 100%? It's a stupid question. Look.
It's a pretty important position.
No. You don't have 100%. Only a liar would say I have 100% confidence. I don't have 100% confidence that we're going to finish this interview.
We will.
Let's go.
Coming up.
Now, if I'm Pete Hegseth, I'm not thrilled with this answer. It starts off as a pretty resounding backing of Hegseth, but then it's kind of not. And Trump likes Hegseth. He actually does like him. He's liked him since he was on Fox News. He likes the way he looks on TV. He likes the way he acts on TV. And then there's this internal mandate that I talked about in last week's midweek episode where the White House doesn't want any high-profile firings or resignations so early in this second term. But Trump's saying he doesn't have 100% confidence in the guy in one of the most important jobs in the administration. And given the size of the U.S. military, one of the most important jobs on earth, that's a big deal, and not definitely a vote of confidence in Pete Hegseth's continuation of being the Secretary of Defense. And finally here, let's get to what Trump said about DOGE. Here it is.
The question I think people have is, did DOGE go too far, too fast, too recklessly?
No, I think DOGE has been, saved $150 billion. We saved, that's a lot of money. There's also a lot of things right now under investigation, which is going to increase that amount by a lot. That's a tremendous amount of money. There were some things where, when I heard about them, I put them back, as you know. There are things that I'm considering right now putting back, but overall we've saved hundreds of billions of dollars.
Well, the original promise was $2 trillion, went to $1 trillion, now to $150 billion, and heading south.
You don't know what it's going to be because we have things that are at a very high level that are being looked at right now. We also found tremendous waste, fraud, and abuse, as you know. We found a lot of fraud. There was a lot of fraud. Fraudulent things were taking place, and we ended that, and those people are going to be suffering because of it.
A legal note, fraud is a crime. There have been no referrals to the Justice Department on any.
Well, you don't know that, do you? How do you know that?
Have there been referrals to the, are there criminal referrals?
How would you know that? that there were no referrals. I think there were referrals.
They generally, all right, there's been no investigation from the Justice Department.
How do you know that?
I'm asking you, sir.
No, you're not asking me. You made a statement. You're not
now
asking
I'm asking
me.
you.
That was a statement that you made. There have been.
I'm asking you.
Have there been? Yes, there have.
So there have been referrals for fraud from the work of
DOGE. Have been. Take a look at some of these things that took place. Billions of dollars were given to people.
So first of all, this savings number is almost entirely false. Right now, DOGE on its own website says that it saved about $160 billion for the American taxpayer. That is way down from the estimate that Musk was going to be able to cut $2 trillion from the federal budget. That was a campaign promise he made on Trump's behalf at multiple rallies. It's something that I've talked about before, and something here you can see Moran trying to get at. Second, only 7.5% of those savings have been verified by independent outlets, meaning the actual number of accounts canceled or contracts closed by DOGE they would consider savings comes in around $12.5 billion, which, on paper, to an average person, $12.5 billion is a lot of money, but in the scheme of the federal government, it's just not, and it certainly is not compared to what we were told we were going to be saving. In fact, a new report from CBS put out just yesterday and then was actually updated today found that DOGE might have pushed the U.S. government to spend an extra $220 billion over this same time last year. And some of that isn't entirely the Trump administration's total cost. It's more the result of things like benefit payments that are just on autopilot, but a lot of it is attributed to the extra costs that come from cutting agencies and departments, paying benefits to those employees who were let go, legal fights for all of these things, and then the operational costs of shutting these things down, because to save money, you have to spend money to wind these things down. Now, third, they didn't find fraud. Most of these things they said were fraud were in things like Social Security and Medicaid or Medicare, and I've talked about this a lot, and I've written about it a lot on the Make It Make Sense Substack. But those fraud claims seem to have been rooted in a fundamental misunderstanding of the code and systems used to track payments to people across the country. And then on top of it, Moran was right to say that there haven't been any DOJ referrals for fraud. And you could see Trump getting angry here when he was caught saying something he didn't actually know. And we know that there haven't been any referrals because, first, that would have been something the administration would have been saying as often as it could, as loud as it could, saying that they've opened up, even if it was just thousands of fraud cases and not the millions they say exist, but even just one fraud case stemming from this DOGE stuff would have been something the administration would have talked about nonstop, and they just haven't been. Second, there isn't a single mention of anything like this in any of the Department of Justice releases right now. The fraud investigations that are up on the system for that stem from well before Trump took office, some of them stretching back into his first term. And the problem being here is that Trump was caught in this DOGE scheme that is not producing savings and isn't producing convictions, both of which he promised. And when he's pressed on it, he gets combative. And that's sort of the whole crux of this interview, isn't it? It's not new behavior from Trump. We all kind of knew the guy we were getting, whether we voted for him or not, although some people a little less, some people a little more. But this interview should leave Americans with something. And that's that there's a president in the White House right now who doesn't want the buck to stop at his desk. He refuses to see basic facts and elements of reality of the consequences of the decisions he's making, and when he's asked to do so, he lashes out. And we're only 100 days in. Okay, that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show, whatever podcast app you listen to this on. Like and subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications, and whatever new buttons YouTube added, hit all of them so you don't miss out on any new videos, and it helps share the show on YouTube. You can also subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack. It's just $5 a month, and I've got a brand new article up that was just put up yesterday about what it means to have Amazon back down in the face of Trump. It's really interesting. We'll talk a little bit about it on Friday, but you should go check that out. And as always, continue to share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Granthermes on X and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you on Friday.